Justice in Rome did not begin with truth. It began with a body, a single human life chosen, prepared, and displayed so the city could convince itself it was still pure. Before the knife ever touched her skin, before the crowd gathered like hungry shadows, her fate was already sealed. Rome did not punish in silence. It punished in public, where shame echoed louder than pain. Every footstep, every tear, every trembling breath became part of a ritual older than mercy. The city believed order needed witnesses, and suffering needed an audience. Her death was not meant to solve a crime. It was meant to teach a lesson, a warning shaped from flesh, a message carved into bone. Crowds stood shoulder to shoulder, pretending to watch justice, but secretly craving the sting of cruelty dressed as order. They said Rome was civilized. They said Rome was lawful. But beneath the marble, beneath the hymns and the laws, something darker pulsed, a hunger to keep control by turning a single woman into a symbol. And when her blood touched the dust, Rome believed itself clean again. But the stones remember. They always do. In Rome, punishment began with a march and ended with a blade. She was stripped bare, forced to walk through the streets as if her shame could cleanse the city more than water or prayer ever could. The officials called it purification, but the account books told a different truth. Guards earned payment. Food sellers made profit. Spectators counted as numbers. Her suffering became proof that order had been restored. Who first decided that humiliation could be holy? The old writers called it justice. The stones beneath her feet called it business. And when the records closed for the day, the bones of the condemned still whispered their own testimony. The sun rose over the forum like a witness ready to speak. Doors opened, not to welcome the morning, but to begin the performance. A woman, her hair cut short to mark her guilt, was pulled through the city by a polished chain meant to reflect her fear. The guards kept an almost ceremonial rhythm, walking slowly not to rush the punishment, but to pace the lesson. Each step was calculated. Past the temple she once entered with hope, under balconies where her name had once been called with affection, through markets where the price of olive oil was weighed beside public rumors. Every turn widened the circle of those who watched. Children stared. Elders lowered their eyes. Merchants kept working, because witnessing was part of their civic duty. Shame was not accidental here. It was planned, taxed, rehearsed. Rome shaped pain into instruction and spectacle into social order. Her footsteps echoed not just on stone, but through the written laws that guided them. The Lex Cornelia demanded that those accused of impurity or betrayal be displayed before the public, as if exposing their bodies could somehow bring balance back to the universe. Breaking Rome's moral code meant breaking its contract with the gods, and the debt had to be paid in visibility. Even the path she walked had been planned long before her rest. Scribes in dusty rooms mapped the route like accountants, choosing corners where crowds were thick and travelers passed often. Tablets found in archives list the exact spots where her sentence had to be announced, making sure traders, pilgrims, and soldiers off duty all became witnesses. Justice moved on a strict schedule. Arrests at dawn, shaming at midday, disposal at sunset. These hours matched the busiest moments of the market. Because punishment worked best when it blended with everyday business. Every coin exchanged near her passing acted as a quiet vote for order. Rome's economy did not slow down for pity. It timed itself around cruelty. The herald lifted his voice above the restless crowd. This woman has corrupted herself and the peace of Rome. No evidence was shown. None was necessary. The ritual itself served as proof. As she walked, the state reminded its people that law was not a shield. It was performance. Every pull of the chain, every sob swallowed by noise, rebuilt the idea that Rome stayed pure only because someone else was branded impure. She wasn't paraded for her crime. She was paraded because the city needed a mirror it could point at and say, "That is not us." The people watching were not merely a crowd. They were the final piece of the ritual. They were jurors in a silent trial meant to reassure the city of its own purity. If they winced, order wavered. If they laughed, the empire felt steady again. When she faltered, when her knees buckled from fear or exhaustion, the guard pulled the chain tight with practiced force. The correction was swift, almost rehearsed. Rome would not allow even despair to interrupt the script. Mercy had no place in this choreography. Sometimes a hand reached out from the crowd, offering kindness a sip of water, a touch of comfort. But the law forbade such gestures. Anyone who helped a condemned person could be accused of blocking justice. Even compassion could be punished. By turning pity into a crime, the state transformed silence into loyalty. Their lack of action became obedience. Their stillness became faith in the system. By evening, the slow march reached its final destination, the amphitheater. What began as a legal procedure now shifted into ceremony. The condemned were purified through blood. To the priest, she represented corruption contained. To the audience, she was entertainment dressed in moral language. To the treasury, she was a cost already approved. And when the blade finally fell, the real cut was made in the scrolls of the law. Pain was not random. It was planned, funded, and executed with precision. Every cruelty had a line in a budget: payment for beasts, wages for handlers, oil for torches. None of it was chaos. It was structure disguised as brutality. We like to imagine that cruelty comes from chaos, from moments when people lose control. Rome proved the opposite. Cruelty worked best when it was organized, scheduled, and carried out with calm precision. The real question is how power persuades an entire city that pain is purification and obedience is virtue. To understand it, you must follow the path from the streets to the arena, from law to logistics, from being a spectator to becoming part of the machine. The amphitheater was not a place of disorder. It was a device built to turn punishment into a system. The Romans called it damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. The words sounded elegant, almost sacred. But behind that smooth Latin lay an entire industry of controlled violence. Shows began weeks before any victim was dragged inside. In cramped offices lit by smoky lamps, clerks wrote names, listed accusations, and calculated expenses. A lion from Numidia cost 6,000 sesterces. A condemned criminal cost nothing. That arithmetic was the empire's favorite equation. Ships crossed the sea carrying special sand chosen for contrast pale enough to make blood visible. coarse enough to tear skin. Inspectors judged the grains by touch, letting them slide between their fingers like gold dust. Senators debated color in carefully written letters. Because the arena's beauty depended on choices made far from the roar of the crowd. Every cruelty had a bureaucrat to record it. Every death had a clerk. Fear and all were Rome's most loyal servants. They secured obedience far better than bread or charity. Emperors understood that people follow power more easily when their emotions are carefully managed. Feed their stomachs with grain. Feed their conscience with spectacle. Keep them entertained, and they would forget to question why blood was required at all. Behind the scenes, procurement agents struck deals with beast traders. Carpenters built traps that would snap open on cue. Musicians practiced rhythms meant to control breath and heartbeat. Every roar, every gasp, every rising cheer was a debt paid in obedience. Archaeologists still find the paperwork. Clay tablets listing wages for animal handlers, penalties for showing up late, instructions for draining blood from the sand. This was not madness. It was a workplace. The amphitheater turned violence into labor. It turned labor into civic identity. Even the seating arrangement enforced hierarchy. Senators sat closest to the killing. Ordinary citizens sat higher. Women, freedmen, and slaves sat near the top where shadows swallowed their faces. Rome arranged empathy by elevation. The higher you sat, the less responsibility you felt. The priests insisted they could not spill blood inside sacred ground, so they rewrote the rules. When a Vestal virgin broke her vow, she could not be executed by blade. Yet she had to die. Their solution was tidy and cruel. Bury her alive beneath the city with a little food, a lamp, and a prayer, leaving judgment to the gods. No blood touched the soil, and Rome declared itself pure. In Rome's moral arithmetic. Procedure mattered more than mercy. If the ritual stayed clean, they believed the soul did too. The body became a loophole for theology, and philosophy added its own layer of approval. Stoic teachers claimed that pain refined character, that endurance shaped virtue. Their polished words offered a perfect excuse for cruelty. Rome's leaders nodded along while the amphitheater showed those ideas in brutal action. The arena did not only punish, it taught. It trained the crowd to feel on command fear, relief, excitement. Musicians beneath the stands matched rhythms to rising tension. Drums signaled impact. Silence signaled suspense. Thousands breathed together like a single living creature shaped by emotion. Ancient writers tell stories of men who swore never to look at the games. But one shout from the crowd broke their promises. Curiosity dragged their eyes open, and once they looked, they were changed. Addiction began in a heartbeat. Rome understood the human mind long before science explained it. The emperor did not kill alone. Every eye in the arena helped. Watching became approval. Looking became loyalty. To turn away was a kind of rebellion. By noon, cruelty had transformed into art. Executions reenacted ancient myths. A woman tied to a bull became Pasiphae. A thief torn apart became Orpheus. The gods themselves were used to disguise murder as ritual. Poets wrote verses praising these scenes, claiming that the amphitheater made the old stories come alive. It was easier for citizens to accept killing when it felt familiar, when it felt sacred. They could leave the arena saying, "We did not kill. We honored tradition." That confusion, that mixture of faith and violence, was one of Rome's most dangerous inventions. Above the sand, the emperor's seat controlled everything. Hidden tunnels allowed him to appear only when he wished, turning his arrival into revelation. When he stepped into view, 50,000 people rose as one. His stillness set the rhythm. A single gesture could decide life or death. Even silence was a command. The arrangement of seats was a map of power. Senators closest to blood, foreigners at the edges, slaves in the dark corners. From emperor to beggar, everyone participated in the same performance, submission disguised as celebration. Rome's cruelty survived because it did not rely on one tyrant. It required everyone. Merchants sold food outside the gates. Poets decorated the violence with elegant language. Ordinary people filled the seats. All believed they were protecting civilization. To question the games was to question Rome itself. Writers like Tertiary and later called the arena a fake templar place with its own music, incense, and sacrifices. The god worshipped there was not Jupiter, but the crowd. His warnings read like an attempt to break a spell. But by then cruelty had become a habit. The games no longer horrified people. They soothed them. The amphitheater worked because it made evil feel ordinary. As the years passed, the arena's violence did not shock the people of Rome anymore. It calmed them. It offered a sense of order, a rhythm they had grown used to. Cruelty became a habit, a tradition disguised as entertainment. And the deepest question remained unanswered. If everyone saw what happened there, why did no one stop it? Empires fall, but habits have a longer life. By the 4th century, the great amphitheaters began to crumble not because citizens revolted, but because the numbers no longer worked. Wild animals cost too much. Loyalty was cheaper to buy through other means. When treasuries shrank, emperors discovered morality. They issued new rules limiting the shows, proudly declaring virtue while quietly counting the savings. The end of the games was not dramatic. No great moment of awakening, no sudden wave of compassion. It died slowly, through bureaucracy. One law reduced spending on festivals. Another limited the number of fighters allowed in a single show. A third banned executions in the arena for the sake of decency. Each decree sounded noble, but the real reason was balance sheets, not mercy. And yet the result was the same. The sand grew quiet. The gates closed more often. The rituals of blood faded into memory. To make the decline seem heroic. Later writers added a story: one monk stepping into the arena to stop a fight. His courage so powerful it melted the emperor's heart. It is a story people love because it promises redemption with a single act. But the truth is far less dramatic. The games died the way most systems die, through exhaustion, shortage, and slow neglect. No hero ended them. Math did. Even after the shows stopped, the arena lived on in smaller forms. The images of violence stayed everywhere. In the mosaics decorating wealthy homes, hunters speared beasts with perfect posture. On lamps, gladiators appeared beside household gods, their poses turned into symbols of strength. Children played with wooden swords, swinging them in imitation of what their parents once cheered. Families quoted old poems about heroes and beasts during dinner. The violence had been absorbed into decoration, into memory, into culture. Cruelty softened into art, and art preserved cruelty. That is the most dangerous kind of remembering, the kind that beautifies the crime. The kind that turns blood into pattern and suffering into style. Ancient writers warned that what the eye enjoys, the heart learns to accept. But for Rome, acceptance was the point. The amphitheater was never just stone. It was a school, a system that taught its people not just to watch cruelty, but to admire it. North of the Forum, near the old Colline Gate, lay a place with a name whispered like a curse, the Campus Celeratus, the field of evil. Here, the Vestal virgins who broke their vows were buried alive. Their execution was renamed devotion. Their murder wrapped in ritual so the city could pretend innocence. The ground there held Rome's hypocrisy in its soil. Archaeologists have matched descriptions to the site. It existed. Beneath that earth, priests murmured prayers as they lowered the doomed woman into the chamber. A lamp, a loaf of bread, a small dish of oil symbols meant to make the killing look like judgment from the gods. Rather than from men, the earth swallowed the city's guilt. When the dirt was packed flat, officials congratulated themselves for avoiding bloodshed. That attitude-saving appearance while destroying truth was the most Roman thing of all. To a city terrified of disorder, illusions mattered more than morality. One buried woman for a year of civic that was the arithmetic. In their eyes, cruelty was not failure. It was efficiency. Centuries later, the great arena became a ruined silent stone, broken arches, and sunlight drifting through gaps where crowds once roared. Visitors walked the same path the condemned had taken, but guides spoke only of design and architecture. They pointed to the engineering, not the agony. Time turned suffering into scenery, and distance made cruelty feel harmless. But cruelty rarely disappears. It only changes form. Look around today, and the old pattern returns. A public shaming spreads through a screen. A face goes viral. A mistake becomes entertainment. Millions watch. Millions judge. The crowd no longer fills stone seats, it scrolls. The roar is quiet. The violence clean. The humiliation fast. Every share is a kind of verdict. Every comment is a thumb turned down. We call it justice. Algorithms call it engagement. Behind both sits the same ancient idea. Attention can be power, and pain can be a spectacle. In Rome, power needed witnesses. Now it needs views. The tools changed, but the instinct stayed. Rome's greatest invention was not roads or law, it was consent. The willingness of ordinary people to find meaning in someone else's suffering. When the empire fell, that habit survived. It traveled, it adapted, and it still asks the same question. Who benefits when a crowd enjoys another person's humiliation? History shows that cruelty survives through routine, not brilliance. The ancient arena ran on three constant fuels: fear, spectacle, and silence. Fear built the gates. Spectacle filled the seats. Silence kept the schedule moving. It finally ended only when enough people stopped showing up, not through rebellion, but through absence. An empty bench became a quiet protest. A turned face broke the rhythm. Walk through the ruins at dusk, and the stones seem to whisper old calculations. They remember the weight of bodies, the distance between benches, the cost of each show. They remember the woman dragged through the forum, braided and cut open to satisfy a law disguised as purity. She was not a symbol to herself. She was just one person caught inside a system that used her as proof that order still worked. Every part of the scene had a choice behind it. The guard who pulled the chain a little tighter, the vendor who kept selling figs, the poet who turned her pain into verse, the spectator who clapped because everyone else did. Power survives through repetition. Memory survives by naming. And when the noise fades, choices remain. When triumphs are counted, no one wants to admit that silence often pays the price. But history keeps its own ledger, and when it closes, the bones still speak. They always do. They remind us that one woman, on one morning, in one proud city, was turned into a warning so others could feel safe. Her suffering became a calculation. Her death became a lesson. Rome mistook punishment for prayer, cruelty for order. Centuries later, people walked the same paths without hearing those echoes. Yet the arithmetic remains unchanged. Every society that values control over compassion rebuilds the arena in some new form. It may no longer be stone. It may fit inside a screen. But the logic is the same. Fear to guide, spectacle to distract, silence to maintain balance. The woman once marched through the forum was not a hero or a villain. She was simply a human being caught inside a system built to feed on obedience. Rome believed her pain kept the city pure, but history shows the opposite. The cruelty only revealed what the city feared to face in itself, and through every age. One truth survives: when crowds fall quiet, when people refuse to watch, the machine loses its power. Only absence ends it.